Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today is this month's patron pick. I'm so thankful for all of my wonderful supporters on Patreon. The topic that was chosen this month is one that was a popular suggestion for a long time when I first started doing patron picks. In fact, it was suggested consecutively for several months and even acquired a bit of a cult status this way, though it never won. So I'm glad that I finally get to produce this video. I'll be talking today about how the regenerate mechanic works. This is a previously evergreen mechanic that dates all the way back to Magic's first set. In those days, there was a special damage prevention step right after damage was assigned, during which regeneration abilities could be activated to save the creature from dying. In the 6th edition rules change, this step was eliminated, which started a gradual decline in the mechanic's popularity, since it now differed substantially from its flavor-based roots, adding to its already somewhat confusing nature. Around the same time, bury was removed from Magic's vocabulary as a keyword action, meaning future cards with similar effects would include an instruction to destroy the permanent without the possibility of regeneration. Later, it was observed that this phrase was being slapped indiscriminately on basically every removal spell, such that regeneration was generally only useful against damage-based removal. The number of cards referencing regeneration gradually waned until Oath of the Gatewatch, which was the last standard set to have any cards featuring the mechanic. After that set, we wouldn't see another new regenerating creature until Exterminator Magmark in the Commander Adjunct to the Modern Horizons 3 set, after which it disappeared again until Wolverine in the Marvel Secret Lair. I think it's extremely fitting that Wolverine was what rekindled enough interest in this mechanic to finally push it over the line in the patron voting, because that's how I've been describing regeneration to players for years. It's, of course, a bad practice to rely on flavor for rulings, but when it comes to describing how mechanics work generally, such analogies are often very effective. If you're familiar with D&D, the magic card Death Ward should also give you an idea of what this mechanic is supposed to represent. If you're not, it basically works like a focus band in Pokemon or a GA in League of Legends. Those are the best Universes Beyond analogs among franchises that I have experience with, although I'm sure that there are some other good ones out there. If you aren't familiar with any of those franchises, the important point is that regeneration acts as a shield that protects the permanent from being destroyed. One common point of confusion is that a lot of people think regeneration brings a creature back from the dead. It does not. When a creature regenerates, it doesn't go to the graveyard and come back. Rather, regeneration prevents the creature from dying in the first place. To put things a little bit more formally, here is the official CR definition of what regenerate does. If a permanent would be destroyed, instead you remove all damage from it, tap it, and if it's an attacking or blocking creature, you would remove it from combat. Let's unpack a few things about that formal definition and examine the consequences. First off, as I touched on before, the language regenerate target permanent is a little misleading in terms of what's actually going on in the game. Based on the English meaning of those words, you might expect that during the resolution of a death ward, something might physically happen in the game to represent the creature, regenerating itself. But actually, nothing visible happens at all when the spell resolves. Rather, an invisible regeneration shield is placed over the targeted creature. The next time that creature would be destroyed this turn, all that stuff I said earlier would happen instead. As a consequence, you need to cast Death Ward before the creature is actually destroyed. Once the destroy effect is actually happening in the game, it's too late. Replacement effects, like Regenerate, need to exist before the event that they replace happens in order to apply to it. Because of how the stack works, this generally means responding to a removal spell with that Death Ward, or casting it in the Declare Blocker step, which is the last time players get priority before combat damage gets dealt. Here's another fact that many people get confused about. Any permanent can be protected by a regeneration shield, not just creatures. It's true that creatures are the most strongly associated with regeneration, but there's no rules reason why a non-creature permanent can't have a regeneration shield on it, and that would work to protect that permanent's destruction just the same as it would if that shield were on a creature. Regeneration only works to protect the affected permanent from being destroyed. The Magic rules are very particular about this. If a rule or effect does not specifically use the word destroy, regeneration won't stop it. So regeneration would work against a Fel, but not against a Swords to Plowshares because exiling is not the same thing as destroying. In the same way, you cannot regenerate from being sacrificed, even though sacrificing a permanent has the exact same physical action as destroying it would. You can regenerate from taking lethal damage, though, because the state-based action that moves lethally damaged creatures to the graveyard does so by destroying them. Likewise, a creature that's been dealt damage by a source with Death Touch is also destroyed, so you could regenerate from that too. Because of how state-based actions work, if a Death Touch creature deals damage that would be lethal even without Death Touch to a regenerating creature, both of the state-based actions that want to destroy that permanent get combined into a single game event, meaning only a single regeneration shield would be needed to save it. Unfortunately, none of the other state-based actions destroy permanents, so you cannot regenerate a creature that's going to the graveyard for having 0 toughness, or an aura that's attached to something illegal, or something that's dying due to the legend rule, or a planeswalker, saga, or battle with too many or too few of the appropriate type of counters on it. And on top of all that, some effects that do destroy say that the permanent can't be regenerated. So of course, you couldn't use a regeneration shield against any of those either. If the permanent had one, and one of those effects tried to destroy it, the shield would not activate and the permanent would be destroyed anyway. When you look at it, the list of things regenerate works against is pretty small compared to the list of things that it might plausibly stop, but actually doesn't. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk about that can't regenerate: indestructible creatures. See, the regenerate mechanic replaces a permanent being destroyed with something else, but if it's not possible for that creature to be destroyed, the replacement effect will never activate. It's totally legal to have a regeneration shield on an indestructible permanent, but that shield will just never do anything as long as it's indestructible. With that being the case, maybe you're wondering about a slightly different example. What would happen if you had an ordinary, non-indestructible permanent with 2 regeneration shields on it? Well, anytime such a permanent would be destroyed, there would be 2 replacement effects that wanted to apply to that event, one from each regeneration shield. That permanent's controller would choose which one to apply, and that regeneration event would replace the event of destroying the permanent. Normally, regeneration shields are all the same, but some of them have extra effects when the creature regenerates this way. In such a case, the distinction of which shield that's being used would become relevant. Because regeneration completely replaces the destruction with a different event that does not involve the creature being destroyed, only one regeneration shield is used. Any others on that same permanent will remain intact, waiting for another destruction event. Now that we know all about how the regenerate mechanic functions, let's cool down with some challenge questions to test your understanding. First up, Amy plays a lightning bolt against Nick's planeswalker that has 3 loyalty. Nick wants to save his planeswalker with a reknit. Is this possible? And to answer this, let's recall that damage dealt to a planeswalker causes a corresponding amount of loyalty counters to be removed from it. If a planeswalker has 0 loyalty counters on it, that planeswalker is, quote, put into its owner's graveyard. Although this is the same physical action as destroying, it does not use the word destroy, so it doesn't officially count. Therefore, while it would be legal for Nick to cast reknit on that planeswalker in response to the lightning bolt, doing so would not affect anything about what happens. Now here's another one. Amy plays a reknit on her 4/4 and Nick plays an incinerate against it. Then Nick plays a hero's downfall. Does the 4/4 die? So incinerate says that the creature can't be regenerated this turn. This doesn't just apply to the damage from incinerate, it means any regeneration shield on that creature will be ineffective, regardless of why the creature is being destroyed. Interestingly, the Oracle text for incinerate lets you damage any target, but the no regen clause only applies to creatures. So if this question was about a 4 loyalty planeswalker rather than a 4 toughness creature, the answer would be different. The planeswalker would be able to regenerate off that hero's downfall just fine. Okay, what about this? Nick plays a Doomblade on Amy's Rock's Pummeler that has a shield counter on it. Amy responds with regenerate on her creature. Does Rock's Pummeler lose the shield counter? Well, when the Doomblade resolves, there will be 2 replacement effects that want to modify the event of destroying Rock's Pummeler, one from the shield counter and one from the regeneration shield. Amy will choose which one of these applies first, and that will replace destroying the Rock's Pummeler with something else. The other effect will no longer apply because the event does not involve Rock's Pummeler being destroyed anymore. If Amy applies the regeneration shield first, the shield counter will stay on her creature, but Rock's Pummeler will become tapped, which might affect her plans for later that turn. Suppose we had the exact same scenario, except this time Nick used a Terror instead of a Doomblade. Well, in this case, only one of those replacement effects from the previous scenario will be able to apply, so the shield counter will be consumed. Despite their obvious similarity, using a shield counter is not the same thing as regenerating, so Terror's no regen clause won't stop that. Also, unlike Incinerate, Terror only stops regeneration shields from applying to its specific instance of destroying a permanent, meaning that if some other effect wanted to destroy Rock's Pummeler later on, the regeneration shield that was still acting on it could replace that. Now let's say Nick's removal spell is a Lightning Bolt. How does that change things? Well, One other thing that shield counters do is if a creature with a shield counter would take damage, you remove a shield counter instead and prevent that damage. Recall that lethal damage causes a creature to be destroyed, so that means the shield counter would be removed and prevent that damage from the lightning bolt, with the regeneration shield remaining intact. Okay, let's take a look at this card, Incendiary Flow. What if Amy played a flow against Nick's Grizzly Bears, then held priority and responded with Debt of Loyalty? Alright, so in this case we have two replacement effects that want to apply. We already know that regeneration wants to apply to a permanent being destroyed, and the one from Incendiary Flow applies to the Grizzly Bears dying. Dying is contained within the event of being destroyed, and so according to this rule, the replacement effect that replaces the permanent being destroyed will apply first. Therefore, the Grizzly Bears will regenerate and Amy will gain control of it. Alright, how about this? Amy attacks with a Fencing Ace, a 1/1 double striker. Nick blocks with a Land Leeches, which is a 2/2 first striker. Amy casts Regenerate on her Fencing Ace. Which creature will live through combat? And to answer this, let's first consider that there will be two combat damage steps in this combat. Fencing Ace and Land Leeches will both deal damage in the first, and just the Fencing Ace will deal damage in the second. After the first combat damage step, the game will see the Fencing Ace has taken lethal damage, so it will be destroyed. But the Regeneration Shield on this card will replace that with removing all damage from it, tapping it, and removing it from combat. Since Fencing Ace was removed from combat, it won't deal any damage in the second combat damage step, so both creatures will survive. Finally, here's a nice question whose answer has changed recently. Amy attacks with a 3/3, and Nick blocks with 2 Grizzly Bears. Nick has a Regenerate for one of his bears. Which creatures survive this combat? Well, I think it shouldn't be too controversial to say Amy's 3/3 is definitely dead. To see how things turned out for Nick, though, let's go through exactly what happens step by step. During the Declare Blocker step, Nick will cast Regenerate on one of his bears. This is the last time that Nick has priority to cast the spell before combat damage happens. Then, Amy will state how she's dividing her 3 damage from her attacking creature. The logical way to do this would be for 1 damage to go on the bear with the Regenerate shield, and 2 to go on the other, so that that bear would die. Because the new combat damage rules give Amy position over Nick in this sort of spot, Nick doesn't know which creature Amy will damage at the time when he's casting Regenerate. He just has to decide which bear is the most important for him to save. Whichever bear he casts the Regenerate on will certainly live, but the other will likely die. Obviously, it wouldn't make a difference if we were talking about literal grizzly bears, but you can see how that decision might get a little bit more interesting in a more realistic game scenario where all the creatures had different abilities. Given that Amy will avoid damaging the bear with a regeneration shield on it, the shield is kind of wasted, although it will stick around until the end of turn, which might be relevant if Amy has a day effect that she wants to play in her second main phase. Hopefully with all this, you should feel confident answering any questions about regeneration that come up in a game that you're a part of. If you have any other questions, you can ask those in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. That's all I have for you today. Thank you again so much to all of my wonderful supporters on Patreon. Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.